Hello, welcome back. In this country, especially in the courts, for many years the assumption, as we discussed before, was anybody who is bilingual is automatically an interpreter. And even us bilingual people assume the same thing. Why? Well, many times because we used to interpret for friends and relatives, and interpreting in that environment was not the same as interpreting in court. For one thing, interpreting in court puts you in an adversarial environment. When you are interpreting for your friends or relative, that's really a friendly, informal environment. So is there a difference, especially when it comes to professional interpreters, between being bilingual and being an interpreter? Well, what does it mean to be bilingual? I think when the confusion started was because if you see a dictionary like the Concise Oxford Dictionary, this is the definition of being bilingual: having or speaking fluently two languages. So first of all, let's talk about this fluency, because fluency means that you can say what you can think. So in theory, a person who is 5 or 6 years old, a native speaker of any language, by the time they're 5 or 6, they can speak their language fluently because they can produce their thoughts orally. As a matter of fact, a child of 10 or 11 can read and write and speak the language in most cases, and they're considered native, fluent speakers of their language. They can have conversations with adults, with kids, etc. But is that the same level that we need in a court of law? I think that's when the problems began. This assumption, hey, I can have conversations in French with my friend who speaks French, that I'm sure I can interpret in a court of law. Is there a difference? Certainly there is. Now, being bilingual by itself is very beneficial. Two of the most famous benefits of being bilingual, and the most obvious one, is, of course, the fact that you can have conversations fairly easily with native speakers of most languages that you speak, or all languages that you speak, I should say. So you go on vacation, you speak Spanish, and you go and talk to the people down, and they appreciate the fact that you speak their language too. So that's awesome. You can communicate with other people. Having more than one language in your toolkit provides you the opportunity to know more people and communicate with them directly. Also, according to some studies, being bilingual has many cognitive benefits, some of them being learning to pay attention and to multitask, believe it or not. And this is my favorite. You stave off aging and the onset of dementia and or Alzheimer's. This is something that I heard on NPR quite recently. So I love the fact that I'm bilingual now. Being bilingual versus being an interpreter. Obviously, being bilingual is definitely the foundation for becoming an interpreter. However, interpreting requires more refined linguistic skills. Let's talk about those. There are certainly key differences between being bilingual and being an interpreter, especially a court interpreter. First, professional interpreters must possess language skills that are far beyond what an average bilingual person would need to have everyday conversations. Think about it. Most of us can have a conversation all day long with a person and never mention emotion to suppress, unless we're attorneys and we're talking about the job. You might not ever talk about wounds or injuries to anybody because that's not what you like to talk about, but if you're in a court of law, you would require that kind of vocabulary. So your language skills go far beyond the average bilingual person's need. Interpreters are trained, and this is the part that I really want to emphasize. Interpreters are, or I should say, should be, trained to provide a complete and accurate interpretation, meaning for meaning. Remember, we don't interpret words, we interpret meaning. And this communication is not only meaning for meaning, but with all the flavor and emotion of the original statement. If somebody sounds indignant in their language, if you're interpreting, you should sound indignant. If they sound unsure of something, when you interpret, you should also sound unsure. There are certainly key differences between being bilingual and being an interpreter. We've mentioned some of them. Here are some more. An interpreter has to have exceptional public speaking skills, must have confidence while interpreting, and interpret in front of groups of people, sometimes large audiences, sometimes not so large, but always in front of people. As a matter of fact, think about it. Our friend Patricia always says, you need two to tango, but you need three to interpret. So if you're interpreting, you're going to have to interpret for at least two people. That's a group already. Interpreters provide a voice for individuals who otherwise cannot communicate with each other. Exactly. That is the beauty of what we do. Two people, or two peoples, two groups of people, cannot talk to each other because they have a language barrier. There is the interpreter who comes in and ensures that their voices are heard accurately back and forth. We have a very important job, and part of it is to be able to do it accurately. Professional interpreters are trained, or should be trained, to handle highly specialized interpreting situations that require complex vocabulary and nuanced meanings. If you're in a court of law, again, you're going to hear highly technical testimony from coroners, from police officers, from engineers, from medical experts, and also you're going to hear testimony from regular people who speak in more colonial, less sophisticated terms, but might use slang or idioms or other terms. Professional interpreters are always navigating these differences in register and skill level of the speaker. Therefore, court interpreters must possess a language level of sophistication equivalent to a 2-year college degree in both languages. This is not my opinion. The National Center for State Courts had research done about the subject, and their conclusion after rating many exams of many languages was that the best interpreters were those who had that level of sophistication equivalent to a college degree in both languages. Now, notice I'm not saying they must have a college degree in both languages. As a matter of fact, I did all of my studies all the way to my professional degree in Mexico, and it was all in Spanish. But I also studied English, and I am capable of producing English at least at a 2-year college level. I got tested for it, as a matter of fact, and some of you might be tested in your language skills both in English and in the other language. What does this mean? Well, one of the problems that we have found when we're testing interpreters is that sometimes this language level of sophistication, equivalent to 2-year college degree, is present in the person, but only in one of the languages. The other one, it's not at the same level. Therefore, sometimes interpreters, let's say their English is very strong, they can understand things, but their other language is not as strong, and they cannot use the correct vocabulary to express themselves in the other language. This is what you have to take into consideration. How strong are your languages? In court interpretation, basically, even though we always talk about our A language and our B language, and we're going to discuss this in a future presentation, A language being your strongest, usually your native tongue, B, your less strong or maybe not native, secondly acquired language, they're a little different, but they should be equivalent to the minimum required by the study. You must have language expertise, talent, and interpreting technique. These are the 3 fundamental parts of a support system for court interpreters: language expertise, talent, and interpreting technique. So who are you really? If you're going to be a court interpreter, you're going to be a person that is well versed in specialized vocabulary. And again, it's not only legal vocabulary, specialized in many areas. That's why some legal interpreters who work solely with children or in mental health facilities, and the list goes on and on. I know of interpreters that only work for workmen's compensation or immigration. A good interpreter must have cultural awareness, understand local expressions, nuances, because all of them come into play when you're interpreting from one language into another. This is the end of this section.